Good morning, everybody. This is Angie Callen, host of No More Mondays, the podcast where we believe you can have a thriving career or business and an amazing life on your terms. So what I do is bring you guests who prove that fact and also have great resources and advice to help you live and work authentically. Quick note for all of you listening out there in podcast land, I want to remind you that we do go live on LinkedIn every Monday morning at 10 a.m. Mountain and noon Eastern. So if you want the fresh off the presses conversation, head over there next week. And in the meantime, let's get into today's chat. I love leadership. You guys hear me talk about it all the time. However, it doesn't come naturally to all of us, which is a good thing because nobody wants a room of Angie sitting around a board table. That would be overwhelming and unproductive as we all shouted into the void over each other. However, the rise in leadership can be challenging for those who may not be naturally wired towards it, and who naturally know how to mentor others and things like that. But that's where coaches come in. And that's where today's guest, Steve Dwire, comes in. Steve is a leadership coach who has guided multiple technology and engineering organizations from startup to Fortune 100. And through that process, he's learned a few things about how to train and coach technology leaders, how to be a leader himself, how to get more influence, and in general, how to get better results while not stressing yourself out to the max. He's the founder of Northway Insights, where he now helps leaders take that clear action and get those better results. And I can promise you, whether you're an engineering manager already, trying to navigate the painful middle, or whether you're a non-technical leader trying how to get better results with less stress, there is going to be at least one nugget of wisdom in this conversation. So hang on as we dive in. Steve, welcome to No More Mondays.
Thank you, Angie. It's great to be here. I can tell that you have helped with more than a few resumes. That's a great introduction.
Yeah, I feel like I have to give a little nod to my resume writing with my live reads of the intros, but I also think it's fun to kind of set up the tone and set up conversation. And for me, it's great because I get to deep dive into you. And one of the things that I respect and love about your journey is the growth into leadership. Fun fact, Steve went from a 3-person team literally in a closet to influencing decision-making at Fortune 100 companies. And I would love to hear more about how those wildly different experiences and environments really shaped your perspective on leadership, your philosophy, and even your own leadership style. So tell us more.
Yeah, and thanks for that. The 3-person startup, that was an interesting one just because I was brought in as a subcontractor to a contractor. And this was my first foray into the healthcare space where success or failure, or when the application works or doesn't work, it actually affects somebody's health or life. So that was a new experience for me. But my journey was actually through multiple acquisitions. It was not a choice of I'm going to leave this and job hop. It wasn't about, okay, you're done here, you need to go find something else. It was just the next business bought the next business, and it just kept being purchased and purchased. So it was constantly an experience of the product I had been working on that was the focus of the company is now the other team's product. And so you're brought into a company that has their own flagship, and your product is now getting backburnered and maybe sunset. So being able to move into the team dynamics became very important. I remember seeing a question in one of the Slack communities that I'm in about, we just got purchased. How do you deal with this? And a lot of it was just learning how to make connections with the people who are in the new organization. Just get to know them, have a conversation. And it's often difficult because we're geographically distributed. But when you have a chance to make the trip, or when they come in, having those conversations, meeting the people, getting to know the people, and then when there's an opportunity for a new leadership position or a place of influence, serving as a liaison between teams, for example, was often one of those roles that I would play. to help people understand this is what this team does and why their product does things this way. This is what this team does and why their product works this way. What are they trying to solve? Who are they trying to serve? How is it different? Just because they're doing it differently doesn't mean they're doing it wrong. Hey, let's get together and learn to understand each other as human beings.
There's an interesting aspect there of kind of being forced to adapt and pushed into team dynamics that you didn't get to evaluate and didn't really necessarily have a choice in having to navigate. But what I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about is how you got yourself to kind of take that step and do something I'm guessing was a little uncomfortable, because most engineers tend to be more introverted and are not natural conversationalists, natural connectors. And now you're in an environment where that's the key to your success. So how did you kind of overcome that? I almost want to say gap, but how did you push through what I'm guessing might have been discomfort and figure out how to do that genuinely?
One of my early mentors, he was I can't remember his position, VP of engineering or something like that. But after one of the acquisitions, I was meeting with him, and he had seen a little bit of potential, and he challenged me. He said, Steve, you're going to have an opportunity to move into some other areas, but it's going to feel very uncomfortable. He was much younger than I was, and he was in a much higher position. And he talked about how crucial it was to embrace those opportunities where you feel uncomfortable. He said, if you do it often enough, you will get to the point where if you're not feeling uncomfortable, then you start to feel uncomfortable because you're not.
Growth doesn't happen in the comfort zone. So if you're not uncomfortable, you're not growing, which means you're stagnant, which creates a different kind of discomfort.
Right. And then you become addicted to it. I don't know that I've gotten to that point where I get addicted to it. I still like my comfort zone, but having had that advice and seeing the results of going through the discomfort, I kind of have my periods of surge and rest, where the surge will really embrace that discomfort, go through the hard thing. Okay, I've done that. Now I got to take a chance to breathe. Just like with you're a lifter, a power lifter. You focus on the muscle building, and there's that surge and that rest, and both are important to be able to develop. The same thing is true with our discomfort and our stamina, mentally and emotionally.
I love a good deload week. But I think the point there is, nothing and no one is intended to go 100% at 100% capacity 100% of the time. And I think that just in general, corporate business world kind of pushes that expectation on us. And in this situation where you're overcoming transitions or you're adapting or you're pushing yourself in the comfort zone, you need to recognize when you've fatigued yourself enough to now go give yourself a deload week and replenish. And that's a self-awareness that I think is important, especially as you begin to transition up a ladder.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very much. And because every time you move into a new higher position on the org chart, it feels like I'm just going to be doing more of the same, or I'm going to be doing harder of the same, but it's often very different. The challenges that you're facing, the responsibilities that you have as a technical leader become very different when it's a people leader, and the responsibilities leading technical leaders is very different from the responsibility leading people leaders. And that every time you go up, it's not just more weight. It's a completely different exercise.
Okay, so now you're digging into exactly what I wanted to talk about. So I'll tell you a quick little story. Most of you out there know I used to be an engineer. I was what the computer scientist majors at Carnegie Mellon affectionately called a stone crusher, because I was a civil engineer. However, same technical, let's say, personality types when it came to environment and communication styles, one which I stuck out like a sore thumb in my extreme extroversion. But I distinctly remember, even as a young engineer, because of like natural communication, leadership, and extroversion, I noticed very quickly the struggles that people managing had, because they weren't naturally attuned to it and didn't pay attention to the changes in focus that need to happen as you grow a ladder. And this is, I'm so glad you took us here, Steve, because it's exactly what I want to talk about. Because I think, and what I've observed is there's a tendency that as a technical individual contributor starts to move into leadership, they have a hard time changing their focus and changing the proportion of the focus. And they end up holding on to the technical stuff, which is the comfort zone. And then that's where micromanagement comes and they forget about the people. So I'm curious what advice you have to help people navigate that challenge and shift their focus and build the other muscle.
I think a lot of the challenge comes in thinking that it's a new strategy or a new technique that you have to learn. When you move into a different position, you get in there and you start to feel like, all right, I'm overwhelmed. I think I'm dropping the ball, but I don't even know which balls I'm supposed to have. And so people will want a mentor that will give them, here's a technique or here's a strategy. What I find most often is that while the strategy and technique is helpful, often it's not knowledge that's the biggest lack. It is something internal. There's something deeper inside that gets in the way of even being able to. And that's where you and I as coaches come in, is helping people to not just learn the strategy, but to understand. Often it's a lie that we tell ourselves, something that we believe to be true, but it gets in our way. Some of those common ones, especially that you were describing, is that the value that I have in the workplace comes from the tasks that I excel in.
Yes. And that's how we're trained as young professionals, especially in an output type environment like most engineering teams.
And because I have excelled for so long in that engineering task, it has become part of my self-identity. This is who I am. This is how I produce value. And even if I can recognize the strategy of not micromanaging, learn the tactic of letting my team make the decisions, there is still a part of me as that identifies that I may not label it that way, but I still feel like an engineer. I feel valuable when I do engineering, and I don't feel valuable if I haven't done engineering. And this is some of the questions that I often get is, I just don't feel like I'm being productive.
Yep.
People are I think I'm falling down at my job because I can't see what I've done at the end of the week.
Yeah.
And recognizing that team's production is your production is one of the big things that's hard for people to wrap their, I was going to say wrap their mind, but it's really wrapping their heart around. There's an extrinsic versus an intrinsic shift there, right? That my output is visible, tangible, and I have a utilization rate of 85% because of that. Versus this work is, I am doing inner work to help others feel motivated, and now my utilization rate is 50%. But you're not less valuable because of the 25% or 35% change in utilization rate. So I guess my challenge question to you is, how do we help? And this is where coaching comes in. So there's just the sales pitch for Steve and I right off the bat, but we like to add value in No More Mondays. So how can somebody who's struggling with this, or maybe even an individual contributor out there who aspires to leadership, can get in front of some of this? How do we re-identify and how do we begin doing some of the inner work that needs to happen to make the shift that isn't knowledge-based? There's an exercise that you have, and on your Career Benders website, and I have a similar one, but a lot of it is just learning to associate or connect the work that we do, the things that we're responsible for, the tasks that are no longer the engineering tasks, but the meetings that I have to go to. I hear people say, I have so many meetings that I don't have time for the work. And learning to recognize that the higher you go in the organization, the meetings are the work.
There's your 35% utilization change, everyone.
Right. Because, like we were talking earlier, it is those relationships that are so crucial as you move up in leadership and influence. And those relationships happen by having conversations with people. And that's what happens in the meeting. I forget where I was going with this. Your question was about how do we get in front of
how do we re-identify?
Yep, re-identifying, and it is in embracing the role that happens in those meetings, where the things that get accomplished, being able to tie those to the things that you value as an individual. The exercise I was referring to is your discovery of personal values, where you go through and find out what are the things that really I believe are important, those characteristics. I went through a similar exercise in part of my coach training so that we can give this exercise to others. And it takes some deep thought to dig in and dig out what are the things that, not just the things that my culture says are valuable, not just the things that my family has said are valuable. In my version of the exercise, I label those as these superficial shoulds that are very easy to show up in that initial brainstorm. But as we go through and analyze, prioritize, those are the things that often detract us from what we really value. And those superficial shoulds, an example of that would be, if I don't have so many pull requests with my name on it by the end of the week, then I haven't been delivering. It's being able to recognize, of all the things that I feel that I should be doing, which ones really are the ones that associate with my core values. Taking that, what starts out as a brainstorm dump, then being able to sift through them, group them together into themes. And what I really liked about the exercise as I went through it was being able to take that entire set of value and find 2, maybe 3 words that are rich and broad enough that they encompass everything else. So for me, that ended up being a combination of beauty and integrity. And each one of those has so many different meanings, but they wrap around everything else that I value. Then the second part of the exercise is being able to map. These are the things that I do today. These are the goals and dreams that I have, the measurable parts for what's measurable, that say this is how I know I'm accomplishing the objective thing I'm supposed to be doing.
Yep.
And this is how those particular goals tie to the values that I have identified that are meaningful and fulfilling to me. With that kind of a map diagram, you can then take what even feels like it may be mundane and find how it connects to the thing that is personally and individually fulfilling.
So we'll just remind you, core values are the jam. There's a reason Steve and I both have core values exercises that we use in coaching. And we talk a lot about values alignment on No More Mondays. And it is what I would say the single common denominator across the board for any professional, entrepreneur, executive, first year, whatever it is, who's found career satisfaction. There's values alignment. And in order to have values alignment, you have to know what you value, and don't should all over yourself when you're trying to figure it out. So the shoulds you have to be careful of, because knowing your values and how they impact your way of being can help a ton when you get into this leadership stuff, because it helps you relate way more genuinely and authentically. My number one core value is authenticity. And if you look at my LinkedIn post from last week and the ridiculous pictures that I post about it, you know that that's coming through. But if you can show up in your genuine way, everything becomes easier, and there's a lot less resistance. But you have to know what those values are and be able to articulate and identify them and align them first, which is why we both love that foundational exercise.
Absolutely.
There's my commercial for core values. So I want to give everybody a little inspiration, and maybe we can tie values into it, but I would love to hear a success story about somebody that, like, you saw a breakthrough. It could be your own story. somebody who worked through a big barrier because they were able to align things to their values or step out of that comfort zone and make a situation more effective?
The very first person I coached, it was a sponsored arrangement so the person he reported to sponsored his coaching, saw potential in him. And it was interesting because halfway through our engagement, I had a touch point with his boss and asked, "What have you noticed? What changes have you noticed?" And his boss was able to articulate, "I've seen this change, I've seen this change, I've seen that change." And those were exactly the three things that we had been working through. And neither one of us had been telling him, "All right, we don't give a status report to the sponsor because everything stays confidential with the person being coached." But it was these very things. It was the discomfort zone of having to reach out and just have a conversation with the peers. One of the things that's often hard for new managers to understand is that they have spent so much time being a part of the team of engineers that when they become a manager of the engineers, they still feel like those engineers are their primary team. But our first team is the team of our new peers. And it's crucial to build relationship with the peers that are now reporting to the same boss that we do, and helping that group of people succeed, even if it means that my team has to, as we say, take one for the team. We may not steal that piece of success because it's important to let the broader team succeed. But he was struggling building those sideways relationships, the lateral relationships. And so we worked through, you've got a meeting coming up. What are some things that you can do? And he came up with a strategy for how he was going to approach that. And I spoke with the sponsor about maybe 2 months ago. He's since left the company, but he said that as he was leaving, the person who followed him in made a comment about the person that I had coached, saying, "Wow, this guy's really good. We should be giving him more responsibilities." And the response was, "Well, he wasn't that good when we started." So the coaching that helped him to make those internal changes, and part of his journey was also going through the detailed core values exercise, the mapping of those core values to the work that he does in the organization, which coincidentally happened to align with his boss bringing in a division values exercise. So they were doing it at the same time. So back to your point about how important core values are, the jam, both personally and professionally, corporately.
I may or may not be guiding a core values exercise for a whole team literally tomorrow. So there's that. If you're not convinced at the power of this kind of stuff, because I will say, like, we talk about values in the coaching world so much that I think sometimes externally people are like, but there's a reason we talk about it so much. And the part of that story that I want to highlight is the fact that if you don't have these skills naturally, you can build and develop your capabilities.
Absolutely. It is hard work. It's uncomfortable. It goes through that very difficult internal identity change, letting go of the things that have felt valuable in the past to recognize the things that are truly valuable in what's coming up. It's a hard exercise to let go and to regrasp, but yes, it can be learned and it can be changed.
And it is harder and more mentally, emotionally challenging than learning a hard skill. So get ready for it, but it's infinitely more rewarding.
Oh,
and so in that story, you brought up the fact that there were some specific maybe tools or practical actions the coachee took in order to kind of build the strategy and work through it. So Obviously, I think go know your values is the number one takeaway Steve and I would like you to walk away from this episode with. But let's give everybody a little bit, a few more tips, some practical advice. So maybe you know your values and you're sitting down trying to figure out what's going to align or how they become objectives. What are some of your almost like easy to implement tips if for those that are working on this maybe more thoughtful, intentional leadership journey?
Here's some things that were challenges for me to overcome, and I see these recurring, and especially those moving from being the technical expert to moving into the management, and that is to learn to be comfortable with saying, I don't know, but I'll find out. My unwillingness to say that drove me to demand to understand all of the details of everything that everybody was doing, especially when I got new teams that had skills that I didn't have.
Yep.
To the point where the feedback I got was, Steve, it's like you don't trust me, because I felt like I have to be able to represent you in a meeting. But no, I have to be comfortable saying, I don't know, but I will find out.
Yeah.
That would be the first big tip there.
That's a good tip. I will tell you, as a business owner, one of the greatest things I've been able to say is, I don't know how to do that. Let me go ask so and so. So yes, it's liberating, but also empowering to the team. So great. That's a great tip. What else?
The second would be similar to what I shared earlier in the story, is the importance of building those lateral relationships. Just walk up and say, hi, I don't think we've met, but I'm Steve. Especially when it's the geographically dispersed groups and they pull everybody together. Hey, we're having an all company meeting. Being willing to just be the first one to stick your hand out and say, we don't know each other, but I'm Steve. And then learn something about each of those individuals. Learn what's important to them. Learn through conversation what they value. Because then you can learn how to support them, how to help them succeed. And when everybody's helping everybody succeed, then everybody succeeds. So that would be the second really big thing, is building relationships with your peers. And second to that would be with your boss's peers.
Yes. There's like a 360 situation there, right? Don't isolate yourself or put yourself in this little silo. You want to get to know up, down, and sideways, because it's going to help you do your job best, but also give you the best exposure for future opportunities too, if there's a practical piece to that.
Right. And when we think about up, down, sideways, when we look up, also look off to the angles, because it's those, if your boss's peers have a good relationship with you, then they're less likely to complain to your boss about you, which makes his job a lot harder, or her job.
This is a massive effort in stakeholder adoption, everybody. I want to add something. I'm going to be a terrible podcast host and just add advice instead of giving my my interviewee a chance to do it. I actually want to point out the second part. It might even be the third part to that tip that you casually mentioned, which is learning the values of the people you're leading and understanding and knowing how they want to be led, motivated, and rewarded. This is one of, as we share kind of our own experiences in becoming leaders, I learned that I like to lead the way I want to be led, which is leave me the heck alone, tell me what you want and when you want it, and I will give it to you on time and exceed expectations, and don't ask me about it until then, right? Mm-hmm. Completely autonomous, very independent, hands-off leadership. Most people don't want to be and also can't be led that hands-off, but there is a huge gray area between that and the micromanagement that I experienced young in my career that makes me fear any sort of being in the gray area. And so if you get to know your people and they say, hey, I would love you to check in every week, or I need a little bit of accountability to stay on track, then you are essentially getting permission to live in a gray area, which is where most effective leadership that has a little bit of management to it will exist. But you've got to know your people and their values and how they operate.
And know your people. The very first, the first crucials of management skill that I learned when I got my management training over podcast. So that was years ago.
Woohoo!
Yeah. Kudos to podcasters, but that's
Podcast University. It might even be better than YouTube University.
absolutely. I mean, and that was the key thing. And the technique that I learned was the weekly one-on-one conversation. But the importance was the purpose is to know your people, not as a representative of a particular culture or group or background, but as an individual human being. Because and even when we look at, say, profiles of behavioral profiles, oh, I'm a high D, or I'm a blue, or I'm a INTJ, or whatever the label is, they're still individual human beings that are going to surprise you because they don't fit the profile. And it's getting to know them as individuals, just like you were saying. That is the crucial part there, so that not only how to lead them, but how to relate to them and give them the safe space to be who they are.
Humans still matter. I wish LinkedIn still had hashtags because I guess it kind of does, but that's my favorite because I think sometimes we forget that. So I don't know where we are in the number of tips, but I'm going to make you give us one more. I'll summarize where we're at in just general info. Be okay saying I don't know, which I think is a fabulous, like, I don't know, but I'm going to go find out. Resourcefulness is a great tip. Building those like 360 up, down, sideways, and 45-degree out relationships with all the stakeholders involved in your position. And then learning and relating to the people that you lead, especially in their values and individuality. So there you go. That's a wealth of information. Let's cap it off with one more.
And just like it's important to know your people, it's important to know yourself. And that is really where taking the time and having probably a recurring time to just be able to get away from the noise, and whatever works for you. For me, often it's sitting with a pen and a piece of paper, away from a keyboard, and just being able to journal or to write out or to perform one of these exercises like the core values discovery exercise, or the value behavior mapping to really understand who I am, and to reflect not just on what I did over the week, but how have I changed. I have a mentor that I meet with every week, and the way that he coaches his people is he will ask them on every meeting, the opening question is, what new insight have you discovered since the last time we talked?
I like that.
But just being able to have a time where you don't have somebody else asking you that question, but to reflect on, what have I discovered about myself in the last week or so?
I also want to point out that Steve mentioned having his own mentor. So, side note, coach without a coach is like a doctor who won't go to the doctor. But these are things that are better shared in some respects, and having that sounding board who can be the space that you may need accountability to create can be really, really valuable. I guess, again, I'm commercializing for us, which is not the goal here. But it's really being, I think, intentional in creating that time. For me, it's a go outside where I can't have technology kind of a situation is kind of where I tend to, have good thoughts and that reflection. But you can't do that if you're going 100 miles an hour, 100% of the time. So it kind of comes back to where we started this whole conversation with knowing I didn't intentionally do that, but it was kind of a beautiful full circle, wasn't it? Kind of giving yourself what you need in order to be able to fuel others. The saying, you can't fill from an empty cup, applies here. Be sure you can go and continually and consistently refill your own cup.
And reflect on what refilling your cup looks like, because that can even change over time.
That's very true. And, when it comes to this, and I even love the idea of like maybe annually revisiting your values, because they're not going to change drastically unless you have some giant trauma. But they may reprioritize, or you might swap one word for a word that has a little bit more specificity or a little more breadth. Who knows? But I think that's something to put into this kind of like consistent attention and maintenance around your own personal and professional development. And on that note, where does everybody find your core values discovery exercise? Shameless plug. How do they get it?
Thank you. That would be northwayinsights.com/exercises. And there are two downloadable PDF. One is the values discovery, and the other is the values behavior mapping. And then there's a recorded webinar where I kind of go through it, and no charge, no email address, just click download.
I'm trying to be sly and queue up a ticker. Is that right? Exercise is. Wait, the resume writer can't spell. We're also going to throw this in the comments, everybody, so you have it in there to support you throughout. Because if there is one takeaway here or one action you take from our conversation, is revisit or go know your values. They are foundational to every decision you will make in your life and your career, and they will help you operate in a stronger, more intentional, authentic way in your professional environment, whether you're leading, whether you aspire to lead, or whether you're just trying to be led well.
And now you have inspired me. It's time for me to go revisit. It's been a while since I've done the exercise. So thank you, Angie.
Me too. Yay. I love when we can inspire ourselves through our own conversation. And I appreciate you being here to do that, and hopefully just encouraging and maybe even challenging everybody out there with how we think about leadership, because it's a lot less head and a lot more heart. And I completely agree with that. And I'm not surprised that we are aligned in that kind of value and perspective. So I appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom with us today.
Thanks so much for the invitation. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Steve Dwire, everybody, Northway Insights. Go grab the core values tips. We'll pop that here into the comments. If you're listening out in podcast land, you can head over to nomoremondays.info and grab links and show notes from today. And don't forget, we're here live every Monday morning at 10 Mountain, noon Eastern. So join us again next week for another amazing episode of No More Mondays. And until then, I hope you have a great week. Go find your values. Till next week, everybody.